Testing, testing, testing for online. Can you hear me? Testing. Testing the voice. Testing the voice. Testing. Testing, testing. Okay, cool, amazing. Okay. Okay, welcome to week 3. We are almost 1/3 into the term now, so it's so fast. Okay, so the focus of this week. So as you may have seen on the sprint planner, so the focus of this week is more about planning. So planning ahead, planning for the rest of the term, planning for the rest of your project. So planning is the major focus of this week. So other than planning, there's also something new, which is called sprint retro. So this is about like reflecting back. So looking back at your past 3 weeks, how's everything going? Like we mentioned that agile software project management is adaptive, right, rather than predictive. So it's a good time for you to look back at the past 3 weeks and see what works well, what we need to change to improve, to make things better. Okay, so this is the topic of today's lecture and also the topic for this week. So plan and retro. Okay, so let's get started with the first one. So software planning and stories. So why? Why do we need this? Okay, so when people are talking about software project, what came to your mind at first? Or talking about software projects? Coding? Programming? Yeah, so last week I was talking with one of our students this term from this cohort, and they are a founder of a startup. So when I talked with them, and a theme arose was that a common theme that we noticed in the world of software engineering is that a lot of people think, well, web development, well, software engineering, just coding, right? You're just coding something, writing some code, do some programming, and then you will have a website or web app or some kind of software. But actually, software is much more than that. And software engineering or software project management is much more than just coding. So this is a very common confusion. A lot of people thought about that. So when CSE was doing some renovation, they were designing the entrance, like they wanted to have a very big picture there to represent CSE. And some people recommended, like, shall we have coding as the main theme of that big picture to represent CSE? Other people say, how about programming? But then a lot of my colleagues said that, well, CSE is much, much more than just coding and programming. Like, although coding and programming may seem as the foundation or the tool for a lot of things that we are doing nowadays, like artificial intelligence is enabled by coding programming, right? But it's just one part of software or computer science. It's just the fundamental, like it's the foundation, right? It's a tool of doing a lot of things, but it's much more than that. So a very important part of the real world of software engineering or software project management or computer science is making a real impact for people, right? So you need to have an impact to provide some value for people. So today's topic is about to know what you need to do, like to plan ahead, like what kind of value do you want to provide for your customers, for the real users, and then you can know what you are going to code. So that's what we are going to talk about. So how do you know what you are going to have for your software project? Okay, so this is about like software planning and stories. So last week when we talked about Agile software team practices, like when we talk about the values of Agile, let me just show you. Let's have a recap actually. Do you remember what are the core values of Agile? Can anyone think of any core principles or core values of Agile? Collaboration, yep. So people is more important than process, right? What else? Sorry? Yeah, so working on the working product rather than working, like focusing more on the documentation. Yep, that's another one. What else?
Iteration.
Huh?
Iteration.
Sorry?
Iteration.
Iteration, like having like shorter sprints. Yep, so that's another one, like being adaptive rather than predictive, right? So shorter iterations and then reflect back and then improve, rather than plan for a really long term. What else? I think you have mentioned the majority of them already. Let me just show you here. So here are the key values of Agile. So individuals' interactions over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So we said like, we wanted to be more adaptive rather than predictive. Why do we need still to have a plan? So I wanted to explain or emphasize here, it doesn't mean that the values on the right-hand side, they are not important. They are also important. It's just we have like priorities. So we prioritize responding to change over following a plan, but we still need a plan. Okay. Yeah, okay, let me go back to here. So the most important part of building a system is actually figuring out what you need to do. So when a client comes to you and say, can I have a software product for example, timesheet management? And then you need to figure out what do you actually need to have, what kind of values that the customer or the users will need, right? So this is the thing. Okay, so in Agile, so how do we plan for Agile projects? There are a few common practices. For example, stories. So stories means plan work in small customer-centered pieces rather than saying, we need to have this kind of database. It has this and blah, 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 and then the front end is using this like tech stack, back end is using Python or JavaScript or whatever. So rather than that, we say that we focus more on the customer's value. So this is the focus of today. Like we'll talk a lot about stories, what is stories, how to write stories, and where are the stories coming from. The second practice for Agile project is called adaptive planning. It means balance adaptability with predictability. So we need a balance for that, but like emphasize more for adaptability rather than predictability. Sorry. Visual planning. Some people they think that like using some drawings. Like to demonstrate the process, like they start from this page to the other page, or start from this value, this process to another stage. If we have time, we can talk a little bit about that, but I'm not too sure if we can have time. But this is something that feel free to learn outside of the course. Some people prefer more about visual stuff. So yeah, this may be a good tool for you. Planning game, we won't be covered that, but feel free to have a look outside of the course again. Real customer involvement, we'll talk about that because that's very important. When we talk about the Agile value, this is one of the core values, right? So we'll talk about real customer involvement. And incremental requirement, it means that determine detail just before needed. So traditional way of software engineering, they have very long documentation about requirements, like very detailed, very rigid. So today, still some software projects, they still follow this kind of documentation, especially for the software products or project that's about safety, about like money, about health. So those kind of software projects do follow those very rigorous software engineering process. Okay, but for us, we will do this incremental requirement, more agile. Okay, so now the first one, which is stories. What are stories? So in the past, this is how people read stories. So people, this is still very common in some industry, like people are still doing that. Like people coming together in a room, you can do this together as a group as well, and then you can write on some cards and say, well, now we are designing a task tracker software product, right? So what does the customer value? They may value, oh, okay, I wanted to manage my task, right? They may say, I wanted to keep track of my task. They want to say, I want to use the software to allocate tasks, right? So those are the values. So you can write those cards, and then can be very, very brief. You don't need a long paragraph or a few pages to describe it. Just, I wanted to manage my task. Right? Managing tasks can bring value to our customers. It's just for brief reminders to spark conversation, to have discussions with the client, the users, or your other stakeholders or people in your team. It doesn't need to be very detailed. It's just for as some notes for future discussions. Very, very brief. But this is a very helpful template that we will also ask you to practice in this course to write stories. Like in the real world, like some industries or some companies, they won't require their software engineers or people to write in this specific format. But the reason that we ask us to write this in this format is because it will remind you to keep the users at the center of your stories. Because this format says, as a role, like as a specific type of user, I want to do something so that I can achieve some goal. So the result here is the value that this story brings to the users. And it starts with the user. And it centers on what the user can do rather than what your system can do. So this is a very good structure to help you, to remind you to put the value, put the customer, put the user at the center of everything that you do. Okay, so let's see some examples. So let's use our project as example. So here are some stories that I wrote for our task tracker software project. So as a student, I want to add a new task so that I can keep track of my assignments. So as a role, I want to do something so that I can achieve a goal. So this is the structure. But here the other ones, they are also start with as a student. But you can have different type of users for your task tracker. So for example, as a group mentor, I can do something, right? Or as a product owner, your group may have different roles, right? If you prefer to have a role. So you can say like, as different roles, I can do something. Or as a lecturer, as an admin, or as blah, blah, blah. So you can have different roles for a product. So the first thing to write those stories is to figure out what are the roles for your software projects, for products, right? And then thinking about what kind of values we can bring to them and how they can achieve those values. So this is the structure of the stories. Any questions so far about the structure? All good? Okay, so you can see that there are two important characteristics for the stories. The first one is called customer value. All the stories are about customers, right? We start from the user and with the value for the user, right? There's nothing about the implementation details. whether there's a bug, or whether you want to add a database, or what kind of algorithm you want to use. Nothing about implementation details. The second characteristic is that it has clear completion criteria. The customers needs to understand what done means. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now let's start from the first one, customer value. So it must be written from the customer's point of view. Why? Like, why do we need to write those stories in simple, plain language that the customers can understand? Why? Like, first thing, like, it can remind us we need to bring value to the customer, right? But there are actually other reasons. Yes, so when we read those stories, it's very common that we read those stories in collaboration with the actual users who will be using those systems or those softwares. And they don't have the technical background. When you say database, they have no idea what you are talking about. So they cannot give you feedback on your stories and say, well, this is actually what I needed. Or they will say, oh, I need something else, because they don't know it. So you need to write in plain language that everyone can understand. So the customers will be involved in writing those stories. So sometimes we also ask the actual users to write the stories themselves. So when they are writing the story, they may not be following the exact format. And then you can rewrite that in the format, but they can provide you with some ideas on, well, I want to manage my task. Right? This is some kind of value I want. And you can also ask them to help you with prioritizations. So you may get a lot of things that you want to have, right? So it's very common, like, oh, I want to have 100 things for my task tracker, but I only have 10 weeks, and now I only have 8.5 weeks. So I can't do everything. I need a prioritization. How can I do that? Ask the customer to do it for you. It's very commonly used. Best practice, let customers write the stories themselves with your help. Some examples of bad stories: add a button to the login page. Although you may feel like, well, they should understand this, right? Like, everyone should understand, like, we need what button means, like what login page means. But still, this is too implementation focused. It doesn't let us know or let anyone know what kind of value this button is providing. Like, it's not clear why we need a button here. So this is also an example of bad stories. It's also very hard for the customer to prioritize because they don't know what is it for. And it doesn't explain why and what value it provides. Or another bad example is add a database table for task. Technical details again, no customer value. But you can rewrite that from the customer's point of view. For example, allow users to save tasks. If you don't have a database, you can't save the task, right? So you are bringing value to the customers. You just need to write it from the customer's point of view for your stories. So it's clear what kind of value we are providing for the customers. Okay, cool. So another very, very common thing that if you realize while you are writing the stories is you will find that some of your stories very, very big. For example, the one that I was talking about, like managing tasks. This is a very big story. Like, managing tasks can mean a lot of things. So while you are writing your story, you notice that you will have similar problems. Like, those stories are very big. So when the stories are too big, it's too general, and it's hard to prioritize which part of that big story is more important, and what are the specific value that we are actually bringing to the customers. So sometimes we need to splitting the stories. For example, there's another story for like checkout page. Like, checkout can mean a lot of things, right? How can we splitting the stories? to have more visibility about what the story is about and have more control over the stories, like which one to prioritize. So there are a few ways to do it. First one, like very, very commonly used, is by priorities. So for example, in this example again, task management system, a big story. And we can split it into a few, like create a task, very high prioritization, right? Like they need to create a task so that they can manage it later. And then edit a task. So here I mark it as high. Your group may have different understanding. You may think like editing a task is not that important. I can just delete it and create a new one, right? So talk to the customers, talk to the real users, and then you will get a different priorities. And then delete a task, set task reminders, and you may have more than that. So this is how you can split the task management systems based on priorities. So the same broad task, broad story about task management, you can also split that based on the operations performed, like steps, stages. For example, first you need to create a task, and then view all the tasks, edit a task, and delete a task. So there are different ways to split a same story. You can decide which one you want to use for your specific stories. You can also split a task by, for example, data boundaries. Here is an example called collect billing information. The information can means a lot of things, right? So it may mean collect credit card info. It may mean like collect gift card info, collect PayPal info. So you can also split by the data types, split the stories. Yep. So the reason that we wanted to split stories is because we want to prioritize those stories separately, and then, sorry. Can be done in any order. Take practice. It isn't always. Sometimes it's not that possible to split some of the stories. You will realize that sometimes it's just impossible to split. It's okay, just leave it like that. But do practice and to split wherever you can. However, do not split it into too small. So sometimes you may notice, well, some stories are too small, like it can be finished in 1 hour. So you may also want to combine some of the stories together based on the common theme or same categories. But combining stories is much easier than actually like splitting the stories. But both take some practice. Okay, so these are the most common definition of stories. Like as a user, I want to do something so that I can achieve some value. But sometimes some software projects, they also include some special story types. So they are not very directly talking about the user's value or about the user's needs, but they also contribute somehow to the end product or make some contributions or bring some value. For example, making a demo or adding a documentation for the users on how to use the software product. So this is actually also helping the users, but it's not very directly bring value for the customers in terms of what the customer can do with it. For example, documentation stories, non-functional stories, cleanup stories, operation, or even security stories. Yeah, so those are also stories, but they are special type of stories. Here's a summary of the best practices. Non-technical language, keeping the customer as the core, user goal focused, ideally describe problem or solution. Oh, this is a very common mistake that, like, I also made this mistake sometimes. Like, I jump into the solution too early. This is very common for engineers. Like we may already have in our mind a solution to solve that problem, but before that, please identify the user's needs first before jumping to the solution too early. Okay, so when we talk about here, we said that there are two important characteristics. One is customer value, right? So we have talked a lot about customer value so far. And then the second important characteristic of the story is clear completion criteria. So why do we need that? So for stories, like when we identify a user story or a story, we say, well, for this sprint, for this 1 day or 2 day, I'll focus on like getting done this story. So for Agile, we focus on bringing value to the customer, for the user, right? For those 2 days, I will be focusing on that story. But how do I know whether I have done that story, whether I can move on to another story? Like, how do we define this done? So we need a clear completion criteria. And we call that user acceptance criteria. So for each user story, we need a user acceptance criteria before actually implementing that story. So we know what are the goals for that story. So we can do like goal-oriented, like starting from the goal to actually writing the code. Again, this user acceptance criteria is also written in natural languages. The reason is the same because the actual users, clients, customers, they are going to review this acceptance criteria. They will confirm, they will give feedback on your user acceptance criteria and say, well, this is what I meant by done. Right? Or you are missing something, can you please add that to your completion criteria? But can be refined before implementation. So we want it to be adaptive, right? If anything changed, we adapt to that change, can be changed. Cool, so this is an example. Here's a user story. As a student, I want to create a task with a due date so that I can track my assignments. And the user criteria, we can write that in bullet points. The first one is user can enter a task name. Okay, so after you're coding, you can look back, oh, can the user enter a task name? And the second one, user can set a due date, task appear in the task list after creation, task shows the due date, user receive confirmation when task is created. So when you have done implementation, you can check against this user acceptance criteria. Have I done this story? Can I move on to the next story? And this is also very helpful when you know what you want to implement. Very specific. Other example, as a user, I can log in through a social media account because I always forget my password. And the user acceptance criteria here, it specify like how or what kind of social media account they can use. Like after I implement the Facebook login, after I implement LinkedIn login, after I implement Twitter login, I know, well, I've done this story. I do not need to worry about other login, like USW account login or other logins. I do not need to worry about that because they are not specified in this user acceptance criteria. It means that the user did not ask for that. Okay. So, how to write good user acceptance criteria? It shouldn't be too broad or shouldn't be too narrow. You may feel like, oh, this is so hard. Like, how do I know whether I'm being too broad or being too narrow? After you implement a few user stories, you know whether you had been like too broad, too narrow. And then you can reflect back on that and plan better for the next stories or next sprints. Minimize technical detail. It can be more technical than the story itself, but the clients do need to understand them. For example, logins through Twitter, logins through Facebook, these are a little bit more technical, but the users can still understand them. They can be updated during development. Let's be adaptive. Yep, cool. So the bullet points type of acceptance criteria is called rule-based user acceptance criteria. So that is one of the ways to write user acceptance criteria, but there are some alternatives. For example, here's another one called scenario-based. So let's see the structure of scenario-oriented acceptance criteria, this can be done in a given one then format, so more format. For example, given some precondition, so there's a precondition for that story. When I do some action, when I trigger something, right, then I can expect some results. Let's have a look at this example. The user story here is, as a user, I want to be able to recover the password to my account so that I will be able to access my account in case I forgot the password. And to write this user acceptance criteria in the scenario-oriented way, so let's give a name for that scenario. It's called forgot password. And given, so this is a precondition for this user story, is that the user has navigated to the login page. Very specific. If they are not on the login page, they cannot reset the password. So there's a precondition for this one. When the user selected forgot password option, so this is the action that the user did. Like, how do we trigger? And then there's something that needs to happen in parallel, which we use the and enter the valid email to receive a link for password recovery. Then the system sends a link to the entered email. So these are the two things that the user needs to do. Like, they need to select forgot password option, and they need to enter a valid email so that the system can send a link to the entered email. So this is the result. And then the user may do something else, like the user received the link via the email. So this is the precondition for the next stage. And when the user navigated through the link, received an email, then the system enables the user to set a new password. What do you feel about the two types of user acceptance criteria? What are the differences? Like, which one would you like to use? This one? Why? More details and more logic, right? Anyone prefers the first one, like the rule-based one? It's like, here's the rule-based one. This is an example of the rule-based one. So it's easier to read because it's less words, right? It's easier to read, easier to write. So it's more like neat. So you can choose which one you wanted to use. You can also practice both of them. Like, you can use one way to write for one story and the other way for another story. So you can try both of them. But like in real software projects, there may be reasons to choose this one or that one. Like the second one, the scenario-oriented one is easier for writing tests. So later on in the following, we will talk about how to write tests for our software projects. So this kind of more logic type of user acceptance criteria is more helpful for writing tests. But the other one, the rule-based one, is more neat, like it's easier to read, manage, change. So they have their own like pros and cons. So you can see that scenario-based acceptance criteria are more likely to be implemented as tests. So later on, it may help you when you are writing tests. But the rule-based ones are simpler and generally work for all sorts of stories. But for Spring 1, you can choose the one that you want to use, and you can practice both of them. Okay, so let's do some activities now so that you can get some early feedback before you actually work on your Spring 1 task for this week. So can you think of any or some stories for task trackers? Let's do some practice. Stories, user stories. As a specific type user, I can do something so that I can get some value. So that's the structure of stories. Oh, it's not hands up. Sorry. Okay. Anyone want some early feedback? Yep. Ooh, sorry. Monitor the task? Yes, that's a very good one. But how do we write that in the format of stories? As a student, I wanted to be able to, like, monitor is a little bit big. Like, it's really hard to implement based on monitor, because monitor may means a lot of things, right? It may mean like you can view the pending task. It may mean like you want to know what a task assigned to. So this is a very good example that you can practice splitting the stories. It's very common. Like you start with a very big story, and then you start splitting them. So you know the more specific value and more specific things the users can do. Yeah.
What kind of standpoint should I stand as for a customer, as for a creator, and for editor?
Yeah, so your question is what are the type of users? Yeah. Okay, so that's a very good question. Different groups may identify different type of users for your task trackers. Like starting with a very broad topic, you may end up with different type of users for your system. And the way that you identify what are the potential type of users is by talking with real customers, or have a look at other existing platforms, like what kind of users they have, like how they are using it. But yeah, you need to talk with the clients. Yes, we'll talk a little bit more about actually the process, like how do we get those stories. But yes, so different groups may end up with different clients. And because we only have 10 weeks, we have the time limits. So my suggestion is do not make it too complicated at the beginning. Like you can prioritize only 1 or 2 types of users, and then in the later sprints, you may find, oh, I have more time, I can add more features, I can add more advanced things, and then you can add more type of user and add more features later. Yeah, question? Yeah, sure.
What exactly things should we do in sprint one? I mean, what kind of thing we should create? Or because we as for a team, and we do something for together. But as for now, I still don't know what kind of thing, what kind of item for the apps should we create.
Yeah.
Or it just decide by ourselves, or it
Cool. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So your question is about you don't know exactly what you are going to do for sprint 1 and how you are getting those stories. That leads us to our next topic, actually. But before we move on to the next topic, can we get one more user story so that we can provide some feedback for you so that, yeah. As a business manager, I wanted to be able to add and delete multiple tasks so that I can manage multiple tasks. Is that what you said? Okay, cool. So this is also a good example. So any feedback for this user story? I'll repeat that again. As a business manager, I wanted to be able to add and delete tasks so that I can manage multiple tasks. We can split that. Yes, that's what I thought as well. So you mentioned add task and delete task, so that they are actually different things. So you can split that into 2 different, different stories, because they are bringing different values for the customer. Although both of them are about managing the task, but managing the task in a different way and bring different values. Yeah.
Is that
as a customer, I wanted the messages or the tasks to be clearly so that I can understand easily. Oh, wow, this is such a nice example. Any feedback for this one? Yeah, so that's my thought as well. So this is a very typical example of vague stories. Like you said, easily to understand, clearly describe. So this kind of descriptive word is really hard to implement. Like what is clearly, like when do I know when it's clearly? Or when do I know my implementation make sure that it's easy to understand?
Point the important message as well.
Yeah, you need to make it more specific. Like, it's very common that some students start with writing stories like, my software product is easy to use with good usabilities. Very common. But this is too general. Like, no one knows what we mean by easy to use or good usabilities. Like, these are very good features of software product. Like, we need to have software products that are easy to use. This is very important. But we need to define what we mean by easy to use or good usability. Yep. So when you communicate with the customer, you can ask them, like, you can ask them questions like, what do you think? What kind of things that I can do to make it easy to use for you? And they will tell you. Maybe they have challenges in the past with other like task tracker tools. It's too hard to use. And because they have blah, 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 blah. And then you can do something different. Right? Yeah, yeah, try again.
As for customer who is a student, I want the message can be obvious to pick out what is important, like use different color. And I want, if I can have a question with the table, I can quickly find the button to asking the question.
Okay, I'll repeat your story. So you said that as a student, I wanted to prioritize the tasks using different colors. And what was? If you have questions about deliverables, you can find a button to ask questions. Okay, any thoughts about this one? This is our last one. Any thoughts about this story? First of all, you are talking about two different things. One is prioritization. The other one is asking questions. They should be split into two stories because they are very different things. And the second feedback is that we need to follow the structure. So for example, for your first part, you can rewrite that into, as a student, I wanted to add different colors to my task so that I can know the prioritization of those tasks. So this is the structure. Okay, so the structure will be very helpful for you to identify what are the values that you are providing and what are the actual features that the user can do and what are the types of the user. Right? Practicing following the structures of the user stories. Okay, no more examples. If you have any other user stories that you want to feedback, feel free to come to me at the break. Any questions so far about the stories? Okay. Okay, so I had these stories. So the story sounds very similar to the issues on the issue board. Right? Last week, we talked about issue board. We said we wanted to put on the issue board what we wanted to do next. But stories is also about what you do next. So what are the differences and the relationships between stories and issues on issue board? So when you identify the user story, please put them on the issue board. So the stories will become an issue. And issues are tracked on your issue board. So that the stories are like you plan on what to build, and then issues help you track and manage the process. So this is the relationship and differences. So every story will end up as one of the issues. But issues can be more than stories. So issues can be, we need a like teamwork contract. This is not actually bringing any value to the customer, right? But this is something that your group are going to do. So it also goes on the issue board as an issue. Or it may be, well, there's a bug in that feature. Let's fix this bug. So this may also be an issue, but it's not like the type of story that we talk about. Huh? So story is one kind of issues. So stories will become one of those issues. But issues is more than stories. And the story is just planning on what kind of value, what kind of features you are going to have. But issue board or issues help you track the progress about like how you are implementing those stories. And whether that story is done, okay, let's move on to the next story. Okay? Cool. So yeah, I'll talk about that later. So now let's get to your questions about like how do we actually get those stories? I cannot just write the stories by imagination. I cannot just imagine the customers will need this, the customer will need that, right? So we need to actually talk with the customers to get those stories. And there's a process for getting those stories. It's called requirements engineering. There's a process to get those stories, to get what kind of values the customers need, and to prioritize them as well. And typically, there are 4 stages or 4 steps for requirement engineering. The first one is called elicitation, and then analyze, and then specification, and validation. We'll talk about them one by one. But before that, let's take a break for 5 minutes. Let's come back at 8 minutes. Come back at 7 p.m. Okay. In the meantime, if you wanted to wait here, you can have a look at the Sprint 1. So I made some updates to Sprint 1 guideline, and then we'll talk about that today as well.
is it just like one branch would be enough for the whole project?
I think everyone should have their
Yeah,
own
if you don't
function.
have your own branch, how can you merge that
Yeah,
into
true.
main? So everyone needs to have a branch.
Actually, the problem was my part that I decided was like debugging, or you can say testing and communication. Okay, which I feel like I need to change now because otherwise I'll be losing marks. I won't be able to merge and do the things. That's the
Oh,
problem.
no, yeah, change. You need to change.
I think there is a lot of
Is it
Yeah.
possible I can still change the
Of
contract?
course, you can change
Yeah.
anytime.
Okay,
Yeah, anytime you can change that.
that's perfect then.
Alice branch and check out a new branch.
Yeah.
no, actually,
Sorry, we need to get started with the lecture. So after lecture. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. I got some questions about the Sprint 1 deliverables. First question is about the features for Sprint 1. I got asked this question by a couple of people. So the feature that we need to have is add task and issue, this one, add and delete task. So I got questions about like what are the UI matters? Do I need to make it really pretty, or do I need to email some confirmation to the users, or like database consistent? So what if I reload the server, whether I can still see the data? No, we don't need any of those. Just the minimum will be enough. So as long as we can see, okay, you are displaying those tasks. You can add new tasks, you can delete tasks, that's enough. I'll show you some, can online people hear me? I'll just double checking. Okay, they can hear me, perfect. So let me show you something that I've got, and this is actually more than enough for Sprint 1. So you can see that I can see some tasks, I can delete them, I can add a new task. That's enough. That's more than enough. So your UI can be even easier, simpler. Okay, so for Sprint 1, the main focus is for everyone to understand the starter code, know how it's what basically fundamentally, and practicing Git, practicing like collaborating with your team members, reflecting and everything, planning. More than enough. So what I'm showing you is pretty enough for Sprint 1. So the next question I got, like, just very few things to do for Sprint 1. Like, there's another requirement on Sprint 1 to like everyone needs to have a merge request into main. Like, how can we do that? There's not much to do. You can decide how you split the work with your team members. So you can have, for example, one person doing, or two person together. I would suggest two person doing together for one thing, like adding tasks, another two person together doing like deleting tasks. And then you can say, oh, there are still other people, like I have nothing to do, I have nothing to merge. So, but there are other things, like you can still merge into a team contract. Right? For today, you are going to write user stories. You can merge in user stories, and everyone can merge in a new one user story. Right? You merge in one, the other one merge in one. So the reason is just to make sure that everyone gets a chance to practice. It may sound a little bit weird, like in real world, no one will do it like this. Like for such simple Sprint 1, we have at least 5 branches, and then they all merge into main. It may sound weird. But the reason that we design Sprint 1 like this is to make sure that everyone gets a chance to practice. And we know that you know how like Git works. So that's the reason behind the requirements. Okay, so another question that I got during the break is when we talk about the stories, we said that there can be different type of users for the project. The question was, how do we know or what kind of users to have? Can we make the decision? The answer is yes. Your group make the decision of what are the types of the users for your project. Another question that I got was, will Sprint 2 and 3 build on top of Sprint 1? Will this whole 10 weeks working on the same project? The answer is yes. So what we are doing this week is planning for the rest of the term. Like what are the features you are going to implement for the rest of the term. So you are going to write stories as a way of planning for the rest of the term. Okay? Oh, one more question that I got during the break. Can I still change the teamwork contract? The answer is yes. You can always update your teamwork contract. It's a live document. It doesn't mean that you said, well, this is a contract, I can't change it for the rest of the term. No, you can always change it whenever needed. It's a live document. Did you have a question? Yep. Yes. Yeah, we are doing the task tracker project for the three sprints. So the question is, for sprint 1, what features do we need to have? All you need to have is displaying those tasks, being able to delete the task, add task. Enough. That's it. Easy marks, easy marks. I know sprint 1 is more about setting up the foundation, making sure that everyone's on track. Everyone knows what we are doing, because I know some of you have some background in computer science or engineering from your undergraduate or your previous courses. But we also have other people who don't have that background. We want to make sure that everyone can contribute for the whole term. So if you have a group of diverse students from diverse background, I would suggest that more advanced people spend some time helping the people who are new to the world of software engineering, so that everyone on the team can contribute for the rest of the term. Okay, and it's a good opportunity for everyone to catch up. Okay, question?
Maybe you have said that, but I'm sorry.
No problem.
What exactly apps or project we should make in Sprint?
So what's the topic of the project? Task tracker.
Maybe the apps or anything, because my group had decided to create a timetable apps.
Timetable app? No. So the project will be about task tracker. Yeah, tracking tasks. So you can read the story at the beginning of sprint 1, so you can know some background. So imagine that I am your client. I have a problem. I have some needs. I came to you and say, well, this is my problem. Can you solve my problem?
Any language, just to create.
Language Python. Backend needs to be Python. And front-end HTML, CSS, CS. Yeah. Cool. Any other question before we move on to requirement engineering? Yeah, question.
So, how do we require to have to use a story for the get task and delete task, or we can combine it into a sentence?
The question is, for adding tasks and deleting tasks, do we need them to be separate or together? Can I get some answer from the audience? Separate. Yeah, I heard people saying separate because they are different things. We need to split them. Yep. So you need to have more features, more user stories than just adding and deleting tasks. I'll talk about requirement engineering. You will know what I mean. Okay, so now the topic is one question online, sorry. When will the guideline for Sprint 2 be released? It will be released next week, week 4. We are not there yet. You just need to worry about Sprint 1. So even though for Sprint 1, I'm still only releasing it like week by week. The reason is that I don't want to overwhelm you with things that you haven't learned yet. So I'm just releasing everything week by week. Okay, cool. Requirement engineering. Okay, so requirement doesn't just appear out of thin air. We need to derive them. We need to have a way to figure them out. Okay, so requirement engineering is a set of activities focusing on identifying the purpose and goal of a software system. It may involve end users, managers, engineers involved in maintaining a lot of things. So these are all stakeholders. So if possible, try to have a conversation with all stakeholders. So what are stakeholders? Stakeholders is more than just users. Stakeholders may include, it will for sure include the users who are actually using your system. But it will also involve people who are maintaining the system, or the experts in that domain. For example, you are making a software product for like healthcare, and you have no background in healthcare. How do you know what kind of features you need to have? Talk with the healthcare experts. Or if you are like designing a software system for self-driving car, you may also want to talk about people who knows about privacy, right? About security, right? So these are all stakeholders. But for Task Tracker, the reason that we choose Task Tracker as the project was because everyone has used some type of Task Tracker. So everyone knows what is it. So you can play the roles within your team, take turns and say, well, no, I'm the end user, right? And you are like that background. Okay, so there are a few steps to do it. And the first step of requirement engineering to get those stories is called elicitation. So what it means is to get the data. So what it means is to get the data. Talk with people. Talk with those stakeholders, right? Do some research about the market. So for example, what we are doing is a task tracker, right? So GitLab issue board is also a task tracker. Have a look at what other people are doing to track the task. There are other examples like Jira. Right? Some people ask me about Jira. So Jira is also a task tracker. Other task tracker like Trello. Do some research about those task trackers. They may have their own pros and cons. Some of you may have used some of them. So how do you feel about using them? Are they easy to use? Did you have any challenges using them? Right? Are they too fancy, like too hard to use too many features? You may want to have a focus for specific type of people, like students for group projects maybe, or other like business owners to track their software projects maybe. You may have a specific target, specific focus, so you do not need those fancy features. So think about that, doing some market research, do some interviews with stakeholders. What does interviews mean? Asking questions. Talking with people, right? So the difference between focus group and interviews is like interviews is normally one-on-one conversation. You talk with one specific people, get more like in-depth information from them, from their specific point of view. You can ask a lot of following up questions. You can ask them, can you expand on what you mean by that? You can ask like, what's your experience using Trello? Did you have any challenges while using Trello, or what are your needs? So what would you feel about if there's something cancelled, blah, 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 blah. You can ask them those questions. But for focus group, is that you bring a group of people together, and they may bring different backgrounds, different expertise to the conversation. So the focus group may involve people who are like end users, like so all people with specific domain expertise, or software engineers who knows about like technical capabilities, limitations and stuff. So focus group, you can bring a group of people together and ask them questions like, what if, what is, how is the experience with this or that? Or what do you need? What are challenges you faced? Ask them questions. For our projects, for Task Tracker, what you can do is you can interview or do focus group with potential users like your classmates or friends, maybe from your own group, maybe not in your group but in the same class, or you can also talk with your friends. Everyone should have used some kind of Task Tracker, ask them questions. Observe how people currently manage tasks. It's hard to observe but you can ask them questions about like how you use task trackers. Ask about and brainstorm with your team about the features, and then research similar tools. Ask what problem the students have managing tasks if students are your target user. But you decide who are your target user. Okay, so this is the first step. Talk with people. get the data. And the next step, after you have got the data, you need to analyze the data. You may notice that a lot of people mention the same problem they have faced with Trello, with GitLab issue board. So this may be a prioritization for you. So this may be a theme, like a common problem people are facing. Or you may notice, well, there are some dependencies. Well, to be able to editing tasks, they need to create the tasks first. So this is an example, but you may notice other dependencies. And you may also notice that there are some conflicts. For example, some people say, well, this is such a bad feature. I hate it. It made my life so difficult. And other people saying, well, I love it. This is amazing. This is fantastic. I cannot live without that feature. So you may notice some conflicts. So you may want to get more data, asking more people or asking them why. Why is so helpful for you? And ask the other group of people why this is so challenging for you. So you may want to get the underlying reason for their experience. Okay, and then establish priorities. What's the most important thing for next sprint? You do not need to worry about the sprint 3, sprint 4, sprint 10, sprint 100. You don't need to worry about that long term. Just worry about next sprint. So what are the most important features I definitely need to have for next sprint? Identify those priorities based on the data that you collected from the step 1. And step 3 is called specification. What it actually means, it just means writing those user stories. Use the data that you collected from step 1, use the analysis result that you got from step 2, and then write those user stories. Put them on the paper, write them down. Write stories in customer-centric language, and then add acceptance criteria to each story. So in step 1, we said we talk to customers, right? Does that mean that we only talk with customers in step 1? No. We talk with customers all the time. Not only at step 1, but also step 2, you may ask them following up questions like, why did you love that feature? Why did you hate that feature? If you feel like I forgot to ask that question, or I didn't realize there was a conflict. Talk with them, ask them why. And then in step 3, when you write the stories, talk with your customers again, asking them, is this actually what you want? Will this be helpful for you? How about those acceptance criteria? Am I missing something? Or am I prioritizing something that isn't that important? Right? Talk with customers all the time. And you can find your customers everywhere. Your group members have customers, right? You can talk with your group members. You can set up some meetings. And then split the large needs into smaller and manageable stories. We mentioned that it's very common to start with large stories. Very, very common. Split them. Okay, any question about the first 4 steps? Talk with customer, do some research. This is the most important thing. And then the last step for requirement engineering is called validation. Checking you haven't gotten lost, making sure that you are on the right track. How do you do that? Talk with customers. Yeah. Okay. So in the later stage, we'll talk more about talking with customers. For example, you may have some not perfectly working software feature, not fully working features yet, but you have something working. Bring that to your customer and ask them, is this solving your problem? How do you feel about the features that I have already got? Right, regularly, often, frequently asking for customers' idea, opinion, feedback. Customer involvement is one of the core values for Agile. Okay. So while you are doing this requirement engineering, while you are getting those stories, you may notice that there are some challenges. It's not a very easy process, I promise you. There are a few challenges you get. For example, requirements sometimes only understood after design or build has already begun. So at the beginning, when you talk with the customer, before you actually have something to show them, they may say, well, I love this user story. This is fantastic. And when you actually start building it, and then you bring something that can demonstrate to your customer, say, well, this is not what I meant, or I don't need it anymore. So So this is also another reason that why we need to go back to the customers or the users frequently, is that you need to know that some of the requirement or user stories is no longer valid, and you need to stop that feature and move on to something that is actually really bringing value to the users. Yep. So do not be afraid or scared or being sad about like, oh, I've been working on that feature for a few days now, and then now the user is saying, oh, I don't need it anymore. Like you are, stop wasting more time. Okay. And then clients and customers sometimes don't know what they want. Oh, this is so common. They don't know what they want until they actually see the product. They will know, well, this is what I want, or this is not what I want. So get some working software. Do not aim for perfectionism. Just working software will be enough. And going back to the customers, the users, the stakeholders, and then ask for feedback. And customers sometimes change their mind. Oh, this is also very common, happens. Developer might not understand the subject domain. Like task tracker is okay, but for some subject domain, I heard some people who are doing some project for people in specific locations in the world, like in Africa, or people like don't have the access to people in that area, so they don't really understand their needs. Limited access to stakeholders, this is similar to that one. Jumping into details of solution too early. Wow, the chicken and egg problem. This is also very, very common for engineers, that we jump to solution very early, and then in the end we realize that we are not solving a really existed problem. We need to make sure that there's a problem first before we're actually solving it, right? Otherwise, you are just doing something that is not actually bringing value to the users. So requirement engineering or getting the stories is not very easy. So this is also why we say we only need to worry about next sprint rather than worry about like 100 sprints later. So things may change. You may understand your stakeholders better and better. Okay, cool. Any question about the process to get the stories? All good so far? Okay, so earlier this lecture, we got an example of the story talking about usability or easy to use or clear understand. So those kind of stories are not actually about what the users can do. Did you realize that? Like whether your task tracker are displaying the task clearly or describing the task clearly, or whether it is easy to use. It's important, right? Like very important. But they are not actually about what the users can do. So these kind of features or these kind of requirements, they are actually called non-functional requirement. They are not about something the users can do or the system can do. So when you read stories, you may notice that some of them belongs to functional and some of them belongs to non-functional. So functional is something that the user or the system can do, but non-functional requirements are some like the how good they are, like how's the usability. So these are the examples of non-functional requirements. These are also very important. It places a constraint on how the system can achieve that, like the speed of the system. This is also very important. Like accuracy, performance, these are also very important things for software systems, but they are non-functional. This is not what the users or the system can do. It's about the performance characteristics. So let's have a look at some examples. So functional requirements, so for example, so this is not written in the format of stories, but you can get a sense of what it means, that the system shall send emails to no later than 30 minutes after from such an activities. For example, when you allocate a new task to one of the members on the task tracker, they should get an email confirmation. And this should happen no later than 30 minutes after you assign them the task. This is one example of non-functional ones. So other ones may be about like the system shall be available to all clinic during normal working hours. Downtime within normal working hours shall not exceed 5 seconds in any one day. So this is also another example of non-functional, but you need to, these are also very important. They are like whether they can also authenticate themselves into the specific system using specific cards or IDs. Whether they are following any privacy provisions. Yep. So you also need to have some conversations with the stakeholders about their needs or their values for those non-functional requirements. Okay, I'll skip those quizzes. Okay. We'll talk about validate later. Okay, so the question, now we talk about why we need stories. What are stories? And then how to get those stories. So what do we need to do for Sprint 1 about the stories? Now is the question. So I have put that on the course website here. So you can see here, I'll make it a bit larger. On the course website, I add a new section under Sprint 1 called Planning and Stories. So here I summarized the steps that you need to do and what you need to submit. So first of all, you need to do some discovery, which is the requirement engineering that we just talked about. You need to talk with the users and document how you discover their needs, whether you did interviews, what kind of questions you asked, what are their like the main themes that evolved from the data discovery, and then show you how you organize and prioritize the features, and then write down your stories with acceptance criteria. Validation, so I'll briefly talk about that. Okay, so validation is very, very easy. Just go back to the customers, go back to the people you talk with and ask them, is this what you actually meant? Or is it actually what you meant? And is it actually what you needed? Or am I bringing some value for you? Okay, so this is called validation, to make sure that you have the proper stories. And then, as part of this process, you need to have user stories. Make sure that you follow the proper format and making sure that you are having them customer-centric. So this is very important for Agile again. And then you need to include specific testable acceptance criteria. There are two types of acceptance criteria. One is called scenario-based. The other one is called rule-based. You can pick the one that you prefer. There's no requirement for which one you should use. Show you how to split large ideas into smaller stories. So most likely you got only large stories from the discovery process, and you start with large stories and then split them. So you can say, well, at the end of the discovery process, we discovered, well, this is the theme, like task management, this is important. And then we split them into blah, 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 those stories. Show the process. And then connect to GitLab. We mentioned that we need to add all stories as issues on issue board. Right? So after you got those user stories, connect to GitLab. Put those stories onto GitLab. Okay, remember that quality over quantity. You do not need to have 100 user stories to get full marks, but the quality, like how you get those stories is more important. And the quality of the stories is more important. Yep, cool. The way that you submit this part is by creating a new markdown file, like .md file that I showed last lecture. I'll show you again. The way that you do that, so here is the starter code. And then under your project, you can add a new file. So for example, you can name it stories.md, and then you can document the process and your stories here, and then push that into your main. So before you do that, you need to check out to a new branch. Remember that we do not make any changes on the main branch directly. We check out to a new branch. You can call that branch, for example, stories or user stories or sprint 1 stories or whatever, like following your own naming convention of your group, and then create a new file called stories.md or user stories.md or whatever you want, but it needs to make sense. And then you can write down what we just mentioned here, what is needed under this markdown file. And then you add that MD file, you commit that MD file, you push that MD file. And if there's any changes, you can always like make the changes, add the things you change, give it a proper commit message, like what you changed about that stories. Maybe you add a new story, maybe you edited a story, right? So everyone get a chance to practice Git. So I really wanted to make sure that everyone get at least some chances to practice Git, because Git is so important for software engineering, software projects. Okay? Your question?
Do we have that story template so we can just use template?
Story template. So you mean the structure of stories? So this is the structure.
We mark down to show our work and chance, right? So,
No. So what you can do is potentially you can copy this to your markdown file, and then under each subsection you add like how you did elicitation, how you did analysis, or some group they may do elicitation or something on the like written card, not like typing at the beginning. So what you can do is you can do it together as a group, and you take a photo of the things that you read on the cards. It's also okay. And then you attach that photo in your markdown file. So you do not need to type everything, and you can still show or demonstrate that you follow the process. So I think that will be easier for some groups who prefer to do like face-in-face, person-in-person for this story process. So you can actually do this during a lab class this week. You can sit down at your table, you can bring some papers, you can have like smaller pieces of paper, you start writing and doing some interviews, and then you take a photo of all the stories and how you group them into themes, how you end up with your like final stories, user acceptance criteria. Yeah, up to you. Yeah. Okay, as long as we can see you are doing the process, you get a good quality user story at the end, and you are adding the user story to the issue board, that's it. That will be enough. We do not want to have like you submitting 20 or 30 pages for this one. Like it's not necessary. Okay, we don't want to minimize documentation. As long as we can see that you are following the process, you're getting the good user story, that's enough. Okay, any question? Yeah, question.
So normally when I and my roommate work at the same file, do we usually do check out the branch or
The question is, what if a group, a few people in your group is working on the same thing? Do you check out another new branch, or do you work on the same branch? Working on the same branch will be pretty enough, and it will be less, because you are working on the same thing, right? So you can use the same branch. But making sure that everyone gets a chance in sprint 1 to merge their feature branch into main, so that they can get a chance to practice the merging process. That will be good. Okay. It's just for practicing. So sprint 1 is more about practicing. All good? Yeah. Okay, cool, amazing. So we have another topic that we haven't touched yet, but we should be able to finish in the rest half an hour, which is called sprint retrospective. Oh, this should be pretty quick. Okay. So here. Let's go back to the agile values again. So we'll look at these agile values again throughout the time, because this is the main focus. So responding to change over following a plan individual interactions over process and tools. So how can we achieve that? We need to reflect, right? We need to know what works, what didn't work, how to improve, but how do we actually do it, right? So how do we actually have this continuous improvement? How do we actually achieve this adaptability, and blah. So the way that we do that is through called sprint retrospective or retrospective. The purpose is to improve the team and the process. There's no single standard for all teams. Every team is different. So you need to reflect on your own team's experience and then learn from that experience to make sure that you are making improvements all the time. Okay, so Agile team constantly look for opportunities to improve their process, work habits, relationship, environment, and many others. And retro is a great way to do so. And there are different types of retros, or different, it's called retrospective, but normally we just say retro for short. The most commonly used ones are heartbeat retro and milestone retro. So heartbeat retro is like we can do it weekly or bi-weekly, just very often. For us, we do it every sprint. And there's also milestone retro. Normally it can be done like longer, but because the term only have 10 weeks, so we were not asking to do that. It's simply just longer, more intensive, like crucial milestones, deeper reflections, many external facilitators, but we are not doing that. We are mainly doing this one. It's the most common type. We do it per sprint. So at the end of sprint 1, we do it. At the end of sprint 2, we do it. At the end of sprint 3, we'll do it as well. It will take about 60 to 90 minutes. I do not suggest you doing it during your class if your class is on Tuesday or Wednesday because you have still another week to go to the end of your sprint 1 and there's still plenty to do this week, for example, the stories. So if your class is on Friday night, you can do it during your class, but you need to do the stories before your class. You can like schedule another time with your group to do it. Okay, yep, so who should participate in those retros? The whole team. You need to have the whole team attending the retro to make sure that no one is falling behind. And who should not attend? Anyone else. Do not get your mentor involved in the retros unless there's any conflict. Try to make it like private, just within your team. So, and you also need to have a facilitator for each sprint retro. You can rotate within your row, within your group for that row. So for example, you can have one people for sprint 1 retro, another people for sprint 2 retro, and another people for sprint 3 retro. So more people get chance to do the facilitator's role. But I would suggest having someone who have more experience in project management during the first retro. It doesn't have to be industry experience, but just relatively more experience with projects. But anyone on the team can facilitate. And best to switch facilitators frequently. The facilitators, they do not participate, they just guide the process. So we need one people to not doing the discussion, but more about like facilitating the discussion. Okay, so this is a very important role. So anyone on your team who wanted to develop more like leadership skill can also try this facilitator role to get experience with that. But start with people who have some experience with projects. Yeah, so facilitator is very important for retros. They have some key responsibilities like keep the retro on track, ensure everyone's voice is heard, does not otherwise participate, and they stay neutral. So they do not say, oh, I agree with that, or I disagree with that. So they stay neutral. If the team members having trouble staying neutral, team can treat facilitator. If you notice, well, our facilitator, although they have some product experiments, but they are not staying neutral, switch to someone who can be neutral. Okay, so this is very important. Facilitator must agree to keep everything confidential. So it needs to be a safe environment for everyone to speak up. I'm not sure if you remember last week when we talked about Agile, another thing very important for team, for collaboration, for effective group works is called psychological safety. Very, very important. Everyone needs to feel safe to speak up, to give feedback, talk about their thoughts. So, yeah. There are also some important warning. Everyone on the team, not just the facilitator, should pay attention, but everyone should be paying attention to this. Ritual can sometimes be damaging when used to attack one another. Okay, when there's blame, criticism, or when team member doesn't treat each other with respect. If anything of this happens, the group member should raise this as soon as possible and stop the ritual, but focusing more on building psychological safety. That's more important. So in terms of timing, so I will talk about the steps. So there are 4 to 5 steps for the ritual. So at the beginning, your group may struggle to finish everything within 6 to 90 minutes. It's very okay. Like, take some practice. Sprint 1 may be a little bit hard, but sprint 2 ritual and sprint 3 ritual becoming easier and easier. So, but some group will feel like, oh, I didn't use the full 90 minutes for the first sprint ritual. It's also okay. Like, you do not need to strictly follow the timing. More important is the process, okay? If it goes extra, you just give it some extra time. If it finished earlier, it doesn't matter, it's okay. And don't be shy about politely wrapping up and moving to the next step if you go too much. Like, if you go like 2 hours, that may be too much. Practice makes perfect. That's the same for everything. And there are mainly 5 steps in the ritual. Okay, so here is the first step. So what we do in the first step is set the stage. Everyone reads this out in your group verbally. Say, regardless of what we discover, we must understand and truly believe that everyone did their best job he or she could, given what was known at the time, his or her skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at the time. So this is very important to set the tone to make sure that everyone is treated with respect and they feel safe to speak up in the later stage. Okay, so the purpose is to create psychological safety, focus on learning, not blame. Everyone must agree verbally. If anyone disagrees at this stage, they should stop the ritual and focusing on solving the conflicts, like setting up psychological safety. Okay, the step is not me making it up. It's from a very famous book. If you are interested in that, you can have a look. The book is called The Art of Agile Development. It talks a little bit more about the process, giving more details, explanations. Okay. Cool, so this is the stage 1, set the stage. Stage 2, gather the data, brainstorming. So what you can do is you can use the whiteboard in your class, or you can do it online as well. So you write on the whiteboard, like first you write like enjoyable. This is the COMP framework, and then frustrating others. And then you give everyone some stickers, and you write. You do not need to write everything. You do not need to have one for enjoyable, one for frustrating, one for puzzling. You do not need to do that. So anything that comes to your mind at that ritual, you put that on a sticker. And everyone write this, do this brainstorming at their, like with themselves. There's no discussion. Everyone just do this in silence by themselves. And it's a simultaneous process. On cards or sticky notes, no discussion yet, just capturing thoughts. And what you do is you put your stickers, you put your cards under those things. For example, you may have a few for enjoyable and one for continue doing something. You put those stickers under those categories, and everyone do that so that you put all the ideas together. And then you start some mapping. It means that you group those stickers or those thoughts from the the previous stage into categories. For example, a few people may say, well, I love the daily stand-up. It's really effective for us, right? If everyone's saying that they really enjoy that, this may be something that you wanted to do, you wanted to continue working on. Or you may have a few people said something about like we should have more meetings. Maybe now we only have one meeting, and people say maybe another meeting will be helpful. So you group the stickers into categories, into themes. But this is still silent sorting. You're not discussing yet. And then you can use some voting to select which cluster to improve. So you may notice, well, after you group them into classes, there are a few clusters. But it's really hard to make changes for all those clusters for your next sprint, because there may be too much changes for you, for your group. So you need a way to prioritize, well, these are the most important things that we want to focus on for the next sprint. For example, adding one more meeting. We only had one meeting before, it's not enough, we need another one, right? Or we need to have more like safe space for everyone to speak up, or to provide feedback or support for each other or whatever. So you need to pick one. So you can use some dot voting. So you can, if you have some the dot stickers, you can put those dot stickers under the clusters. Or if you don't, you can just tick. You can use some like colored markers and tick on the cluster that you feel like you wanted to focus more on. So this is the mutant mapping. And the next stage will take a little bit more time. It's called generating insights. So this is time for us to ask questions to understand more deeply, like why questions, like why this cluster is most important, why isn't the current situation good enough, why are things done this way. So figure out the underlying reason. You can have some discussions. But again, no solution stage yet. So at this stage, it's still about understanding what's going on and why people had that feeling or why this happened. And the next stage is actually about moving forward. So now we have decided, well, that cluster is the most important thing that we want to focus on next sprint. Okay, so how do we make improvements? Think of experiments that might make things better. So you may not sure whether change from one meeting to two meetings will be helpful. This can be an experiment for your group to try. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, right? But don't worry too much about that, because you will have another sprint. In real life, a software project may take 1 year or 2 years, right? You will have a lot of sprints. But although for this project, we only have 3 sprints, right? So it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be, well, we knew it will help. It doesn't have to be like that. And choose one objective as well. Limit to just 1 or 2 improvements, because one sprint is very short. Like aiming for too many changes may be too ambitious because everyone's busy. You also have other things, deliverables to do. So making too many changes at a time may be like harmful, because everyone may be overwhelmed and feel like we are not achieving any of them good enough. Just focusing on one. And someone volunteers to help following through. So you can nominate one who also wanted to deliver leadership skills, like I wanted to follow up on this improvement, this change. I can like say I wanted to volunteer. So these are the 5 steps for retros. To close the retro, we want to make sure that everyone agrees for the selected objective for next sprint. If no consent, choose another idea or try again next time. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes you may find it helpful to add a task to your plan. Maybe it is something you want to add to your issue board. I'm not sure. Maybe it is something that every group want to actually do it and add to your issue board. And checking daily. Maybe daily is too much. Maybe like 2 to 3 times per week will be good enough. And then in your stand-up, you can add a section to reflect on how you work on that improvement. Okay. Common problems, blaming, arguing, nothing happens after. Some people won't speak out. So maybe it happen, but again, psychological safety is the most important thing for successful groups. If blaming or arguing happens, step behind a little bit and focusing on more on like team dynamic and psychological safety first, other than other things. If you need help, ask for help from your project tutor, and they can work as the outside help for if any conflicts happens. What if nothing happens after? So what if your group said that, oh, we want to make this change, this will improve this, it will solve that problem, but nothing happens after? There may be a few reasons. For example, the ideas may be too big, right? It's really hard to change in only one sprint, or it's really hard to achieve. So make them smaller. So you can be adaptive. You do not need to wait till the next sprint retro. If you notice, well, it was too big, we cannot do this for this sprint, change it. Okay, let's be adaptive. May not have enough slack in schedule. Like everyone's busy. We have so many deliverables, so many things to do, and then we are aiming to like a lot of things. So team may not feel they have a voice. So this is again about psychological safety. Yeah, some people won't speak up. So some group may have shy people. That's okay, no problem. So if you don't want to speak up like verbally, you can use other ways. For example, you can use the stand-up opportunity to say, well, I feel like this is not working, at least for me, or other ways, right? Or make them feel safe. Again, psychological safety. So you notice the pattern. I'm mentioning about psychological safety again and again and again because it's very, very important. Okay, sorry I'm talking too fast. But you have the recording, so if you are missing or if you like any point you are not fully understand, you can always go back to the recording. Just I'm cautious about the time. Okay, any question about retro? Is it similar to a meeting by the end, at the end of the sprint? Yes, it happens during a meeting. It happens at the end of a sprint, but it has more structure and more like specific focus for that meeting. It's not about planning. It's not about catching up, but more about reflecting. Yeah.
And do we like make notes for that too? Because for meetings we do make notes.
Yeah, so you do need notes for retro as well. So it's on the Sprint 1 guideline as well. So I added a new section called Sprint Retro. So again, you need another markdown file, another opportunity for everyone to make a merge request, and creating opportunities for everyone to make merge requests. Okay, so another markdown file for the Sprint Retro. Check out to a new branch, create this file, add things to this markdown file. Again, you can use photos, you can use notes, you can use, so for example, if you do it in person, you may have some stickers on the whiteboard, you may have some writings, right? Just take a photo and attach that photo in your markdown file. You do not need to write everything down again, right? That would be some repetitive work. We do not need that. And then you may have like who facilitated that, how long it took, just very briefly, write a name like facilitator ... name. How long it took, like timing ... and then see. So very quickly done. Data gather, what went well, what challenges, what to do less or more. So these are captured on the whiteboard. Take a picture, attach it, that's it. Insights, can you find so this may also be captured on the whiteboard. If you didn't write that on the whiteboard, you may also have someone taking notes, right? So you can also put that notes as part of your Sprint Retro doc. And then this is important. So what do you plan to change, right? So what are you going to improve? Objectives for your team to commit it to. Who volunteer to help follow through, how you track the progress. So this is very important. Make sure that you have that down on your markdown file. Okay, so we already have 6 minutes. I'll keep it short. So for user stories, I got some feedback about the marking criteria was not clear enough. So I split that into bullet points. So in the past, they were like one big sentence. So now I split them up into some bullet points for the marking criteria for user stories. And I also split this Sprint Retro and Teamwork Evaluation as some bullet points in the marking criteria as well. So I hope that's easier for everyone to read. So talking about teamwork evaluation will happen after the sprint is due. So it will start from week 4 Monday after it's due. It will open for, I'll try to open it for 3 days. It will be on Moodle. So I will send a link for that teamwork evaluation next Monday. So not this week, because it will happen next week. And teamwork evaluation will ask a few questions, like how's everyone's participation dependent, blah, 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 blah. So this information, so your inputs, your submission for teamwork evaluation is confidential. So your group member will not be able to see it. Only the tutors and myself can see it. And we're not using it for marking purposes, so it will not have any impact on other parts of your mark. It's only to be used for us to know how your group is doing, to help the tutors to better support your group, to know whether anyone is falling behind, anyone is feeling like they are not being treated well, or they are feeling like I'm being a superhero for that group and like we are not contributing equally or whatever. So it's just for the tutors to know how your group is doing and then to provide support for your group. Okay, but this is required to submit. So you need to submit to get the mark for here. So this together takes 5% of the course mark, the sprint ritual and teamwork evaluation. So you make sure that you submit that teamwork evaluation. And your group, if your group member is not submitting teamwork evaluation, it will not impact your mark for that 5%. It only have impact on their own only their 5%, but I put it as together under the group marks because it's about the groups. That's it. Okay, any question? Sorry about talking so fast. I'm so sorry about that. I'll slow down next lecture. It's just timing. Okay, question? Any question online? Okay, no? Okay, thank you everyone. Good night. Thank you.